Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Medicine for These Times. I have a very special interview today as we get to speak with both Roger and Ken of Fruiting Bodies. And it's very rare I get to interview two people at once, but I love it. Co founders of a business. And this is a business centered around mushrooms. So, hey guys, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Good to have you. Yeah, I had heard of your business, I think, for years now. And I think I've been following you guys. And, it's this kind of mushroom world crosses over into the medicine space and vice versa. And it was through this roundabout way that I was looking for mushroom essences, and that's how I found you. And then I was like, hey, why don't you come on? We can talk about your business, your work, and of course, essences of mushrooms as well. But I would love to hear a little bit about not just fruiting bodies and what you guys are up to, but both of your stories. One thing I really love to hear about is how did you get onto this path of making mushrooms your business? Were you doing something else? Were you ever working in the corporate world? I would love to know what brought you to this magical mycelium world. And
Actually,
whoever
one
wants
more.
to
You want me to
start.
go first? Yeah, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
So, my journey into this realm, if you will, it started with and not being very healthy. When I was young, I dealt with a lot of uncomfortable mistreatments and was just unfortunately kind of failed by Western medicine. I was a patient at Children's Hospital for quite some time. Dealt with just a diagnosis that didn't really fit much of a bill. I was dealing with digestive issues at the time and dealing with what we call today IBS, which is kind of an umbrella diagnosis that doesn't really pinpoint anything. So I had a lot of different symptoms that I was dealing with. And after struggling through high school and missing a lot of school, missed about 180 days my junior and senior year of school, just barely made it to college. Thankfully, my school at the time was very responsive, and allowed me to kind of to homeschool for that matter. And it was through that process of being sick and dealing with depression, normal things as a teenager, on top of missing out on all the social activity that I was so used to. Growing up playing sports, snowboarding, and all that kind of came to an end. And through those, kind of what I would call some of the my darker years of my youth, and missing out on those opportunities and the different situational anxiety that came with all that. It wasn't until I got to college and stumbled across reishi mushrooms that saved my life. And through that, I started looking into all sorts of other herbal medicines, alternatives, if you will. Ken and I don't like to call them alternatives because these medicines are the original medicines. And nowadays we blanket them by calling them alternatives, which is just silly. But in that sense, fell in love with herbal medicine, started making all my own tinctures, wanting to read as much as I can about, making this medicine, growing these medicines. And then from there, thankfully, I was in college at the time. I went to school for environmental sciences, wasn't sure what I wanted to work with, and then fell into sustainable agriculture and food production. So I was going to school in Vermont. We were growing edible mushrooms. I helped another farm start their mushroom farm through a project that I was working on. Ended up working for one of my idols during that time that I met at the Telluride Mushroom Festival out in Telluride, Colorado. If no one's ever been to that is an amazing festival. Just a little pitch there. And through that, I landed in starting my own business. So I had my own business before Fruiting Bodies that was focused on mushrooms and extracts and all that educational content, and kind of shifted gears. One day I was asked to go on the Mycopreneur podcast, and that's where Ken had heard me talking about, the future of mushroom concentrates and just where the industry was going as a whole. And after a few months, I was going through emails one night and stumbled across an outreach email asking hey, maybe we could talk sometime about, doing maybe some white labeling or some contracting. And our first conversation with Ken and I went for 6-7 hours. We ended up just sitting on Zoom all night talking about mushrooms, who we knew, what books we read. And from there, it was really just the start of our friendship. And that's how Fruiting Bodies came to be. So it was really my my portion of the story, it stems from me wanting to heal myself and kind of take that power back into my own hands. And now we get to do the same for other people.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. And by the way, I love Dennis. He's amazing. I had him on a few years ago, I think, and I've had other conversations with him and hung out with him in person. He's of course as hilarious as ever. Well, I love this. I love that you started a whole business and connected through a podcast and kind of just through this kind of mycelium of the mushroom space. And I have yet to go to Telluride, but it's on the schedule hopefully for this summer. I've talked about it year after year and I've heard it's amazing. So hopefully we'll meet in person there. Thank you. Ken, I would love to hear your story. So then what's your history with mushrooms and how did you get on this path?
Yes, thank you. First, I want to say, like, 'cause Roger sharing his story, like how grateful I am for him. He's, as great as he is in a lab and what he does and the products and the formulations and just the um, kind of the energy, the intent, everything he puts into it. He's an even better person, and it's an honor to. I'm excited that you guys, your audience, is getting to meet and know him as I have, and really very lucky to get to work with him and to call him my friend. So, yeah. So so you asked, like, my story. I was in corporate or in business, I should say, before I got into mushrooms. I had started out. I managed a ski resort out of college, and then got into corporate industrial investment real estate and in Chicago, um uh and then so I mean, I know we're going to be talking about mushroom essences, and which includes shadow work, and I think about like how I um didn't deal with things that had affected me as a child and growing up, like thinking that um like the shame, like somehow I'm not, being afraid of my shadow. So I my early experience with mushrooms was psychedelic psilocybin when I was a teenager. And I still say to this day that that probably saved my life. If I didn't have those experiences as a kid, I don't know what would have happened, but I know that it made a difference and it called me back later in my life. So, um, had turned to drugs and alcohol, and was an addict. And so my healing journey and my journey towards where mushrooms are started with 12 steps in AA, which I will also say, for those that know AA, the fourth step, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Well, that's great, but without the shadow, like the shadow, I can do everything that I know in my consciousness, but what about the unconscious? What about the things that I'm not aware of or I've repressed? And so, like, combining mushroom essences or psychedelics, whatever helps to show us our shadow, and things like IFS, which I'm a big fan of, that helps us to, like, make friends, like not be afraid of the things that, or pathologize ourselves or our shadows or these parts of us. And so anyways, the 12 steps though, was a help and a great start. And it began my journey of trying to understand, like, how I got to where I was. And I didn't really like myself, the things I had done, the husband I had been, the father I had been, the son, and you name it. Like, I didn't live up to the values that that mattered to me. And so I started this journey of healing, and it led me to looking at all our systems, and like the food system and the health system, all these different things, and brought me to natural health and medicine, holistic, how everything is connected. And I will say that growing up, I didn't really think about this, and I didn't think about health. And I, what I, and I had like back problems, all these different issues at a young age. And now I realize that it's not just the food aid, but also my shadow, the things that I don't deal with are going to come out in my body. And they were. And so obviously learning all of this and working on all of it, I'm twice as old now. I've been doing this for over 25 years and I have no back problems. None of these things. And I know it's not just, the health and the mushrooms and all these other things, but it's also dealing with the shadow and becoming friends with myself, loving myself, integrating all these parts of me and doing my healing work has also healed my body. So working on my spirit, soul, and mind, and energy also healed myself physically. And, had lots of great teachers. In Chicago, I ran a sustainability nonprofit that introduced me to a lot of chefs because we had urban ag, composting, recycling, and I got to meet a lot of chefs and a lot of amazing people in the food. By the way, I in this change of getting healthy, I became a horticulturist. I learned permaculture. So I was really learning because I wanted to grow my own food and medicine and help others to do the same and get this out to people and make it accessible. And so then I got this job to run this nonprofit, manage it, and met these chefs. And I met somebody who became my business partner for Chicago Mushroom Company, started basically my first mushroom company. It was kind of my second because I had a company that was working with aquaponics and mushrooms and trying to help like home growers and things of that nature. But I started Chicago Mushroom Company with another amazing person, and we grew mushrooms for the chefs in Chicago, and it was amazing experience. And shut that down in around 2018, 2019. And moved out to the Mississippi River west of Chicago, which it's beautiful, and was in the process of starting another company. And I had investors and had a big grow set up working with different people. And by the way, I trained during this time learning about mushrooms and growing mushrooms. I was up in Washington with Paul Stamets. I got to do some stuff with Peter McCoy, who also was a advisor for Chicago Mushroom Company. It really huge help, and I'm a big fan of his. And he's the one who introduced me to mushroom essences and Robert Rogers. I mean, I'd read his Fungal Pharmacy, but it was through Peter McCoy and a workshop I was doing with him that he showed me the book that had just come out, Mushroom Essences. And I knew as soon as I saw it and read it, I needed to meet Robert in person. And so I went out to a workshop with him, and he became a big mentor of mine. And one of the things that was so instrumental for me is he started talking about the functional mushroom industry, and talking about, like, he gave me a lot of questions to ask, because in Chicago, being a mushroom person, people would say, what do you think of this product? Or what should I take for this? And, I knew, but which products were made in a way that would actually give somebody the potency and the bioavailability to actually do the things that it's supposed to do. So I learned a lot about the functional mushroom industry and the businesses through Robert Rogers. And so then with this new company, when I was listening to this podcast, Micropreneur, that Roger was on, and I heard how Roger was talking about it, first of all, his own personal story, and the fact that this was about helping people, knowing the difference that it made for him, wanting to help, this isn't about how much money I can make or how, popular I can be. He was extremely humble, but he just wanted to help people, and he wanted to produce a product that actually worked, that people would, get their money's worth, and not just some great marketing and things of that nature, and putting people and planet ahead of profits. And I was like, wow, this is a person I have to meet. And finally we met, and like Roger said, had this long talk, and we said, like, finally it was like, why don't we just combine companies and do this together? And, brought us to Fruiting Bodies. And then, I knew that Robert Rogers was going to be at a mushroom festival. And in our first talk, Roger and I were talking about mushroom essences and his book, and just essences and energetics and vibrational medicine in general. And so Roger made an essence and brought it out to the festival that we went to. And I introduced Robert to Roger, and Roger gave him the essence that, here you're giving it to the master, right? The person who actually did all the research and all these years, like wrote the book on it. And here's Roger, like gave him an essence that Roger made following his instructions. And you could tell, like when Robert took it, like his face lit up, and he was like, yeah. And so that's where we first talked about working with Robert to bring mushroom essences more into the United States and into the world, because we knew the difference it made. I'd been using it from the time I trained with him, and used it with clients and people that I'd been working with, and saw the difference that it made. And and same with Roger. So that's kind of how we came to. And then of course at Telluride, and we did a talk last year with Robert Rogers on essences, and we're supposed to do a similar talk at the Psychedelic Science Conference this year in Denver on essences. And hopefully hopefully we'll do another similar talk, maybe a little bit different, at Telluride this summer also. So yeah, that's a little bit of the story.
Amazing. I love it. I love all the synchronicities. And it's funny because, even though I had been following you, I had this clear, I love flower essences. I work with a lot of different kinds of essences. I have never worked with the mushroom essence. I've worked with other very powerful plants from, like the Peruvian jungle. Someone had sent me a psilocybin essence, but I didn't know who they were. And I'm a little apprehensive to take essences made by just random people. But I got a very clear message for a client of mine who also works with, mushrooms. And I was like, this message came through, and it was just very clear to work with an essence. And then I contacted my friend, and he didn't have any, but then he recommended, Robert. And that's how I found you guys, because I couldn't actually order from Robert because I guess they don't ship to the US. So you guys are like the US distributors or the US representatives. The one thing I will say, one of my friends is the founder of Arbor Vitae Herbal School, she specializes in essences. And I told her about the mushroom essences, and she's like, wow, those are very powerful. And I'm like, are they more powerful than regular essences? I don't know. I haven't tried one yet, but have you compared mushroom essences versus just, any other, let's say, flower? Have you ever tried
Well,
both?
yeah, I'll say one thing first. I'm sure Roger has stuff to add, but they're very different. The flower essences grow and are made under sunlight, right? The photosynthesis, that's how flowers are grown. So it still brings light to darkness. Whereas mushrooms, which the majority of the mushrooms grow in the dark, right? Underground, in trees and wood. And so it works on the shadow. And so it's a whole different energy. It's the more mysterious. And so with mushroom essences, that's why I say, like, I think it's like the medicine of our times, one of the medicines of our times, because I look around and see, with all the political stuff going on, all these things happen. Like, it's a bunch of people like projecting shadows on each other and on other sides and on groups and all these things. And I know from my own experience, like I grieve, like I know I caused harm and wasn't the person that I wanted to be or could have been, because of my shadow. And and so I see that around. So that's why, like, mushroom essences that are really powerful, but also very safe. And that's like all essences, because you're not actually, you're using the essence, the energetic or vibrational imprint of the mushroom. It's made through lunar energy. So they're made under the full moon, as opposed to like the sun. So the whole, yes. So you're getting a whole different energetic, but it's also safe. Like, I mean, I will say this, as a kid, I wish that my mom, my parents were amazing and did the best they could, but like, they didn't know about these things. And as a kid, if I could have worked with things like my shadow and befriended those things and not been afraid of like different things, thinking I'm a sinner or I'm this horrible, whatever the messaging of the time was growing up. And that I could have, because as you know, flower essences have been used for children also, 90 year over, for a long time since they started, and mushroom essences are the same. So they're very safe, no matter what medications you're on or anything else. Like, it's, a very safe medicine, but it's also extremely powerful and will show you a lot of things. And along with like an integration coach or a therapist or whoever you're working with, it's really helpful, because then you have this opportunity to integrate and work with your parts, work with your exiles, the parts that are hidden to yourself. And, so it's a very different energy. I know Roger has worked a lot with flower essences too. So maybe he has some things on that.
Wow. Thank
Yeah,
you
I
for
would.
sharing. I didn't realize there was a full moon versus the sun. That makes a huge difference. Intense. Yeah,
Oh
go on,
yeah,
Roger.
I was
Yeah.
just from an energetic standpoint, they're definitely, I would say, polar opposites in that respect. Um, I've been using flower essences since 2013, and for me personally, and Robert, I believe Robert's book came out 2015, and comparatively using them within those time frames, I've noticed, and what I really like about the work that Robert did specifically around mushroom essences, because Robert's a clinical herbalist by I don't even want to say by trade, because he's a multifaceted individual. It's hard to put Robert into a box and say he's just an herbalist or that sense. But his work with, so he really started with more of the herbal kingdom and worked his way into that fungal kingdom, and now just has this well-rounded idea of these alternatives and working with these energies. But for me, I really enjoyed the protocol that Robert's kind of designed behind the essences compared to flower essences. With flower essences and with what Dr. Bach left behind, and it's an amazing system. But for me, flower essences feel a lot lighter. They don't feel as, maybe intense might be the wrong word, but for me, mushroom essences, they don't miss with what you're trying to account for. And it's a, how do I put it? It's an intentional medicine, I would say, for me, even more comparatively, yeah, I would say comparatively to flower essences. Whereas, for instance, like my experience with flower essences, using some of Bach's like Rescue Remedy was one of the first ones that, before it was even called Rescue Remedy, just using the actual actives that were found in that. And that was my first protocol, and it worked great. I was dealing with, this was around the same time that I was introduced to reishi and started working with mushrooms myself. So ironically, about the same time that I got into mushrooms, I got into, the flower essences and actually working with them. But mushroom essences being an intentional medicine, I would argue you could use them, obviously using them both intentionally, but for the mushroom essences, it feels like it really gets to that core. And the fact that it's really centralized around the shadow work. I would say, like, it's the same thing working with any of these, these sacred medicines, whether it's vibrational or, a psilocybin experience. You're sitting down, you're setting this intention, and it's the essence of the mushroom. And I would say, like, most of your listeners are probably on the same page as us when we're talking about these things. And the mushroom, it gives you what you need. You don't always get what you want, but you usually 100% of the time get what you need. And I would say, like, with Robert and his system, and to kind of paint the picture for everyone that's listening, Robert spent almost 30 years in his clinical herbalist practice documenting, taking these notes, collaborating with notes of other therapists and clinicians that were using the essences while they were really trying to fine tune and figure out, what each essence was used for. Basically, it's the same thing that, that Bach did when he was kind of putting it all together. And so yeah, over 30 years, Robert had, I want to say maybe 60 or 70 mushrooms that he narrowed down to 48 that they found some really beneficial results from. And through that was, 30 years of development. And then since that time, they've been stacking on more and more of this analytical data, or anecdotal data, if you will. And they've found that, taking 4 drops for a 28-day cycle, like a full lunar cycle, is usually what we recommend with it. And what I really like, my favorite thing about the mushroom essences, is that you're not just working on your shadow, but you're also cultivating that introspective muscle. You're flexing that regularly, when you're doing these protocols. And unless if you're somebody that's, never done journaling or dream journaling, you've never actively wrote down your thoughts, cultivating that skill alone simultaneously while working with the mushroom essences, I think that's the most beneficial, avenue that's reflected from these working with these mushroom essences. And I'd never experienced that, only because the way with flower essences, for me, there was never a strict protocol. And on that same note, while we do recommend that 28-day protocol, we also recommend, using it at your discretion as well. My whole thing with, we're talking about psychedelics in the modern world, and I'm somebody that I've hit, my bookshelf is just all about psychedelic history. All that stuff really fascinates me. I think we're all innately curious about why we're here on this planet and all these things. And through, a lot of my reading, you've got 2 groups of people, and maybe this is a little bit of a rant, but it's interesting to see, we're living in this time where everyone's very strict about, only indigenous use of certain things. And then there's the whole Western world that's trying to, bring it up to a standpoint of being in that kind of that pharmaceutical realm. But in my opinion, these things evolve over time. And I think looking at both sides with at least some level of respect, I'm not, you're never going to hear me say that I'm pro pharmaceutical or anything like that. But it's interesting to see, because we're living through a time where, the protocol or the original way of using a medicine or something, in my opinion, it changes over time. And I think we're going to constantly evolve, but still, taking a step back to note and respect, where our roots come from, and the people that, obviously walked those miles before we did, or being able to stand on their shoulders and actually, reap the benefits and help each other now because we saw it being done one way or another. But I think these things can evolve too. So my point in saying that is, you could take a drop of these before you meditate or yoga, or go hiking for that matter, and really cultivating that introspective ability. I think that's the most beautiful thing and profound thing about these essences and working with these energetics.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Go on.
I'm sorry. I was just going to add something to this, is that it's amazing for preparation and integration too, for medicine work. So I, help people with that, and myself too, is helping this, use these before 28 days, a lunar cycle before a ceremony, and really help to know what your intentions are. Because I have certain, somebody might think they have intentions, and as they go deeper in with the essences, they come up with all kinds of things that really resonate with them, and take that into ceremony, and then can use them afterwards again for integration, to integrate what they come up with. So it's amazing for that. And then and the protocol that Robert came up with was doing it before bed, and then keeping a dream journal. And those that have done dream work, and when you take these, and I know Roger's had some, everyone I've talked with or worked with, and myself, the dreams are there's so much that comes out no, obviously normally with dreams, but with the mushroom essences, especially with intention and creating a little ritual around it, it becomes like a ceremonial thing. And the stuff that comes out in the dreams with these essences is helpful. But we've had people take them just like one time during the day, they were going through something, and they'll just take it. It's 4 drops, and their whole day is changed. They've had like incredible. So it is, there are all kinds of different ways to use it. You have the regular protocol, but really listen to yourself. And that's the other thing that I like about what we're doing with functional mushrooms and also with essences is really empowering people to listen to themselves. And they know, not giving away our authority, like our agency to some authority, but like coming back to our own authority and realizing like the healer inside us, the medicine inside us knows what we need and want. And like Roger said, like the introspection, like when we first introduced these at Telluride, people would come up to us. We have this protocol of like figuring out which essence is for you, because we have 48 of them. By the way, Robert worked with way more than 48 mushrooms to start with. And through this 30 years, he came up with these 48 that consistently had the most impact for the most people in specific areas. And that's what we now offer, is depending on what you need or want, there's an essence for you and what you're working on. And so we would tell people, like, just go in and figure, like, listen to yourself and which one calls to you. And it was really difficult for people. Like, they really were looking to us, like, well, what do you think I should take? And I'm like, trust me, like, you know better than I don't know you, like, you know you, and listen. And it was amazing as people like, it might have taken a minute or two, and then they just like, okay. And they listen themselves. And then time and time again, they would find the one that was for them. And they were like surprised. And that's the whole idea, is like getting people to trust themselves, that they know, and to listen. And then the essence, the energy is already speaking to you. Like it's very real. And I've seen it on people's faces when they realize and they pick it. And every single person has a different story or a different reason why they pick which essence, or, even with functional mushrooms, like, coming up with their own protocol. We have people whose kids are using them and literally bring all, like, it's 3 of our gummies that we have, and bring them to school. And they know themselves at like 9 years old which one to take when, because they've learned to listen to themselves and their body and to the mushroom itself, and be able to utilize these to help them, whether it's focus, or calm down, or whatever it is they need. And I think that's, instead of just like dosing or taking all this stuff, like, no, like, listen to your body. You'll know exactly how much, when, what to take. And so yeah, that's some of the essence.
This is my dream for the entire world. Everybody's just like looking outward for some. I mean, even in the psychedelic space, the medicine world, it's like, what mushroom, I heard microdosing can fix me, or ayahuasca can cure this, or maybe I should just do iboga. And it's like, well, we do actually have all the answers inside, and it is intuition. I actually did, I've interviewed Paul Stamets and James Fadiman, and of course, like everybody else around microdosing protocols, and you're like the Stamets stack and all of them. I'm like, this is how I microdose. I just go intuitively, and I kind of just eyeball it, and I figure out what works for me. And sometimes it's more, and sometimes it's less, and sometimes it's months without it, and sometimes it's 3 days in a row. So I've actually done whole podcast episodes about that, where it's like, build your own relationship, because even though I do trust a certain level of like the research, the science, the gurus like Stamets and Fadiman, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know, it's worked for me this other way, and I've been doing it since day one. So thank you for teaching this to children, especially because these days it's like, it's a rough world. I know I've dealt with a teenager from my ex who was going through like the whole pandemic and the lockdown. And even to hear a teenager say, like, I want to be on antidepressants at a kind of a young teenager, age. And our first reaction was like, well, why don't we try reishi? Why don't we then, maybe microdosing? Like, there's other ways that are maybe a little better, and not to say like, who am I to say what's good or bad? But, like you said, the word alternative, I make jokes that I think the whole, especially the US right now, everybody should be taking reishi. It would really help some people like maybe like stay grounded and centered and take it down a few notches. It has also been a savior of mine. So I want to talk about functional mushrooms and your business in general. I'll ask you to explain a little bit about it, but I know you have tinctures and gummies and different products and then the essences, of course, which thank you so much. I love talking about essences. No one else out there with the mushrooms. But the one thing I've seen over the years, and I'm sure you guys have seen this as well, is like suddenly the last, what, 5 years or so, like there's functional mushrooms in everything, now, right? Like you can go to the corner bodega or wherever and probably find like, reishi coffee or whatever they're doing. I mean, honestly, I kind of make fun of a lot of these because we all know, and you said it, there's some that are just like marketing, right? Like there's some where I'm like, I don't know if there's really much good mushroom in this. Or it's like, oh, just get your mushroom coffee and now you'll be like healed forever. And and then of course there's a lot of there's this whole entire world of everybody and their mother is now making microdose chocolates or, psilocybin, this and that. And I have said over the years, like, how is anyone in this functional medicine, mushroom world, how is anyone even surviving? Because now you can go on Amazon and buy like 20,000 different products and like what's good, what's bad, how do we know? I mean, I know there's a lot more people talking about testing and labs, but there's also, as we know, just pure marketing that's like a bunch of fluff. Do you want to talk about this? And I don't mean to knock the companies that are trying to do well. And I do believe it's like, hey, I'd rather see functional mushrooms and things than just a bunch of sugar and caffeine and additives that are not healthy either. But yeah, what's this mushroom world like these days over the last this last few years?
I just want to say one thing real quick and turn it over to Roger on this because he's the lab tech and like amazing at what he does. But this is the whole reason. Like, I think it is important because it if people take mushroom products that aren't made right, so we're all about education, like more than selling our products. We just want to educate, again, empowering people with the knowledge and information, be curious and ask questions, which is what Robert Rogers taught me when I started in this area was like, just here, these are your questions. So we arm people with like information and questions that they can then go to these. If they're curious about a certain product, they can actually like check and see. We have their own checklist of is it this, so that they know what they're getting or what the answers, if they're not getting answers at all, which a lot of them won't answer, unfortunately, I found. But if somebody takes a mushrooms, like you talked about reishi, are amazing and can make such a difference in our life. But if somebody takes a mushroom product and it doesn't do anything for them, or they're not sure, and it's, and they, we only have so much money, people they're going to have like a negative, oh, these things don't really work. And that's sad. That's like when these things have so much efficacy from thousands of years that have been used. I just, we have a big compounding pharmacy, and this woman is like internationally known, the pharmacist that started it and has written books. And she was talking about her training in China and like all the products here that she just won't allow or recommend in her pharmacy. And she has ours, and we talking about all this. And she was saying the same thing is like really having a product that is like, we're not shy. We're not going to like name certain other companies, whatever they're doing, but we aren't shy about talking about like what to look for and what not and why and the reason, so people can understand it. So I'm going to turn it over to Roger because this is an area that to me is really important for everybody because it is everywhere. Like mushrooms are having their like time, right? Everybody is And we in a capitalistic market where, it's about like, oh, this is hot. Let's get in on this and get our share because it's supposed to go up X% over the next 5 years. Well, even if we create something and market it well, hire a good marketing agency, we'll get our share and make lots of money. And then we can go on to something. And that's not, I mean, knowing mushrooms, they want much more from us. They want better, and people deserve that. So with that, I want to turn it over to Roger.
Yeah, so that's, I've been trying to think of how to condense this down, and I'll do my best. But unfortunately, I didn't share too much about like my work history when I was talking in the beginning. But I worked in the corporate commercial cannabis space for a little bit here in Massachusetts, and it's an fortunate shit show of the corporate scene. And then that's probably giving it a little too much credit, to be honest. You've got another amazing healing modality, product, substance, herbal remedy that is just an amazing medicine. And the corporate companies are just squashing it down to a super low vibrational consumer drug. And it's really shitty. So like coming from that space, and my reason for saying that is unfortunately that space has crept into the mushroom space. It's not the only kind of bad energetic downfall that we're seeing right now. Unfortunately, there's, I'm sure everyone listening to this has probably gotten a mushroom coffee advertisement on social media within the last 60 days. It's unbelievable how much those companies are just funneling into advertisement. Realistically, companies like that, most of those companies, there's good ones out there. But a lot of the people in the mushroom space see mushrooms as an ingredient and a means to an end. And like Ken said, that's not the message of the mushroom. So unfortunately, that's what we're up against as a leader in this functional mushroom industry. And it's like, we're fighting companies that have, a $60K a month budget for their marketing, and they've got a mediocre product with maybe a sprinkle of, reishi that's in it. And everyone's, it's this, I don't know, for a lack of a better judgment or a lack of better wording. It's kind of it's the Wild West right now with the supplement industry, and the mushroom industry is kind of a dick waving competition. And you've got companies saying, our chocolates or our tinctures have 10,000 milligrams of lion's mane in it. And, ours have, 20,000 milligrams of turkey tail, and all these numbers and all the extraction numbers, there's no standard. There's no regulation in the industry. The FDA doesn't regulate it. There's no third party regulation that's going on with it. I would like to see that. And maybe, we've had conversation about even kind of spearheading that in the industry and trying to figure out, how to set that standard. That's kind of one of our MOs when we educate and talk, is that we are setting this standard. And my reason for saying that is, what we do with our products, we do a dual extraction, hot water, hot alcohol. We also utilize ultrasonic technology to make sure the product is extremely bioavailable and your body's actually absorbing it. Everything that I've formulated over the last decade has been, based on scientific research papers. And now we have a product where we're receiving just unbelievable feedback from customers, their husbands, wives, families, their children, their grandparents using it, reaping the benefits, everything from nonverbal autistic children to, grandparents that are suffering with Alzheimer's and dementia. So having, really formulated these products to deliver that therapeutic dose, at the same time, everything we source is, sustainable and ethical, 100% USA grown mushrooms. We support farmers and their communities and families here in the United States. It also helps with lowering our carbon footprint with everything that's imported from overseas. And unfortunately, like I said before, there's no regulation in this industry. So we really pride ourselves in, third-party testing all of our ingredients to show, not only potency, but also safety, in those products. And, what I'd like to say lastly on that note is what Ken was saying before. Our biggest thing is education. Companies are selling unextracted mushroom products. They're selling powders. They're skewing test results based on different chemical compositions and compounds in these mushrooms. So there's just it's kind of unfortunate. And our biggest I would say, like, claim to fame and really raising the tides is that, we educate people about these things. And I could talk all day. We do a whole podcast just on the state of the functional mushroom industry. And it's unfortunate because it's kind of, it's creeping into the medicine space, like we've talked about. Unfortunately, everyone's recommending this stack and this stack. And it's like, I don't know, like, look at how medicine has been used, whether it's reishi mushrooms or ayahuasca. Look at the last couple thousands of years of human interaction, and it should be simple. And there's just too many people throwing all these variables into it, making it, confusing, or trying to, make their claim to fame as, we have the best, or this is the only way to be doing these things. And, that to touch on the point you were talking about before, is everyone's different, whether it comes to substance or dosage or setting. Like, every human is just, wildly different. And while there might be some overlap, at the end of the day, everyone's different in how we adjust and how we, even interact with these things. So it's definitely, I think, very important that we really stand by the ability to help empower people to, to listen to themselves. Cause that's really, I feel like Ken's story reflects that. That's really how I, got into this and have been self-taught and arguably self-healed. This month is 13 years pharmaceutical free. So, just, yeah, super thrilled about that, and just happy to be helping people and educating about these things, because it helped me, and that's really what we're here to do, is just get this to more people.
And
Yeah.
if I could just add, because there are a couple of things I want to add in this, is one, make sure that it's an extracted product and not just a dried mushroom powder, which is a lot of products. So that's one of the big things is, mushrooms the cell walls are made of chitin. So that's why, like, sometimes, like, you don't eat raw mushrooms. I mean, if you ate a lot of them, you'd get an upset stomach, right? Like, people taking mushrooms have also had upset stomachs. And so the chitin is like your fingernail, or like the shellfish. And so in order to break down the cell walls, you need hot water, and then alcohol. You need the dual extraction, because some of the active compounds only come through with the alcohol extraction. And with all kinds of supplements, as we've heard, like from calcium to all these other things, that a lot of the products that are over the counter aren't very bioavailable, and you might only be getting 10% of what the milligrams on there are. So making sure that after and not before, there are companies not just that do the powder, but also that will take their extraction process is just the ultrasound, not the dual extraction before that. So they're still not getting all the active compounds out. So you need the order matters, the extraction, and there are some big companies. So there's two big coffee mushroom, and I won't name which ones, but if you do the research, they come from a company that on their website states that they don't do any extracting. So knowing that they're just getting a mushroom powder in the mushroom coffee, like, that's not going to help them. If you like the taste, great, buy it for the taste, but not for the medicinal value. And really, why not? And we have cafes that are using our tinctures as like add-ons, so that people can get their favorite coffees, their favorite drinks, beverages, and put them, whichever one they need at the time, whether it's reishi, or they want a little energy with cordyceps, or a little focus with lion's mane. They'll put the tincture in. So the tinctures, which are extracted, so they're actually really, I mean, there's no taste to good taste. Like, so they don't change the taste of your favorite beverage, but you're actually getting a medicinal extracted dose. So, and then same thing, one thing I'll say is like mycelium. There's a lot of talk between mycelium products or fruiting bodies and which has the most active compounds. And there's still a lot of research that needs to be done in that area. But 2 years ago at the Mushroom Summit, at the Psychedelic Science Conference, they had a Mushroom Summit before, and they showed the research. A lot of the big names were up there in this thing, and they showed the research, and the fruiting bodies were shown to have 40 to 50 times some of the more active compounds available than the mycelium. And the other issue with mycelium is most of the mycelium grown for mushroom products, for functional mushrooms, are grown on grain. And so when mushrooms are grown, when the mycelium is grown on grain, you can't separate the mycelium from the grain. So you're getting 95% grain and only 10% mycelium, zero fruiting bodies. And eventually we'll have ways, and people are doing research to like find ways to grow mycelium, because there's certainly potentially very beneficial things in the mycelium. And they say, like, just in case, I mean, I imagine most of your listeners know, but the mycelium is like the root system, let's say, of the mushroom. And then and the mushroom itself is the like reproductive, like kind of we say the apple of the apple tree. It's the it's the reproductive organism of the whole organism, which most of that is mycelium. And then the fruiting body is the mushroom that you see. And so I would say, like, right now, if you have a choice, get the fruiting body as opposed to mycelium product, and make sure that that's extracted. And then the other thing is coming from other countries, and I won't name, but there's a large company that gets all of their mushrooms from another country. And I know that there's some loopholes that have been talked about in the USDA to be able to make it USDA organic. And there's been some, testing on some of those products that maybe aren't the best for us. So I said, like, having and being I'm a grower myself, and anybody who grows food, I recommend everybody like have a garden, everybody grow food, everybody grow their medicine. Like, I love teaching it, but like it's the most, like, talk about therapy, like that's therapy right there. And the more people we can get to like build these local farmers to grow mushrooms, like, it's magical. If you've ever been in a mushroom grow room, I get excited about it because, like, with the humidity and everything, it's like another world, and all your troubles melt away. If you had any, like when you went into the grow room, they'll be gone. So and the fact that then we get to know and work with local growers, and we get to see the mushrooms, we get to know the people, there's relationships, and it's all relational. I guess there's so much we could say, like we could have so many podcasts on this, but the other thing is we talked about mushrooms and mushroom essences and energetics, but the people that grow the food, the people that grow your medicine, your whatever, like, their energy matters, like their intention. Like, is this done out of love, or is it just to make a profit? Do you love, like, I know how Roger is, and I know like how much he cares and how much he like loves every bit of what he does, and is very intentional. And I know when I grew mushrooms, like, they were my babies, like they were my family, like, you just care about them. And when you care and love, and you can't wait for people to get to like try it, use it, see it, feel it, because this is something that's like your heart, your soul. And I think it's really important to know who's growing your food, who's growing your medicine, what's their heart, their intention, their energy. And so I want to say that too, is like, when you know your local grower, your local farmer who's growing your mushrooms, and then we're using those for intentional work in a lab, like, that is special. And I think that means a lot in the end product and what people feel, the energetic of the mushroom, not just the active compounds, but they kind of interact with the energetic. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I'm sitting here cheering because I've talked about this for years and years and years, and I am very, very, very particular about, especially if it's a psychedelic, but any of my food, any of my medicines, my essences, like, I'm very particular about where I get these, who they came from, what kind of companies I'm supporting. It means a lot. And I think, this is for those that are out there, like, pointing the fingers at capitalism, which, a lot of people are in general. And I get it because, it is a system that's not serving the greater good. But at the same time, it's like, I don't think it's about like, oh, let's just let capitalism burn to the ground and then what? But it's about like, how do we do this differently? This is, by the way, I've been interviewing people on this since 2020. When did I start that? Like 2016, 2017, about like really knowing, like, who are you supporting? Where's your money going? And it's fascinating because me, even as someone who knows a fair amount about mushrooms, I actually hadn't thought about this. The one thing I knew is I've never really actually paid for any of those mushroom. I call them gimmicks. Like, they're very gimmicky to me, like the mushroom coffee and the mushroom tea and the mushroom matcha. And I have yet to try one that impresses me, and I see people and I'm like, "Oh," and I see a lot of the advertising and I'm like, it would be very easy to just buy or make your own. That's what I've done, is like a double extraction of reishi that I foraged on my own and like just add it in. But or buy it from a company that is doing good work like yours. And this is where I'm glad you're educating people, because I've seen people that don't know, and then they hear about it and they hear the marketing and they want to be better and they want to be healthier. Of course, they're going to try like the easy, cheap, whatever is available on, Amazon or at their local grocery store. But is that really doing anything? I'm glad you brought that up. I will also say you brought up something very important about the relationship and individuals. This is going to publish after we've started, but when we're recording this next week, my good friend, and who's a teacher of mine as well, Sam Perry, is actually teaching a 6-week program on this, which is how I'm really connected with you guys. And it is about that, about it's not the same for every human. Every human is different. Like, I, in particular, am super sensitive. Like, I can have a little reishi and I'm like, whoa. Someone else might not feel anything, or they might have to take like double the amount that I take. And it's really interesting. And it's like you said, there's this relationship, there's also the energetics, which, few people leave out. And it actually really upsets me, because I think it's actually more important than people realize. And I'm praying that, the next iteration of what's happening in the world, as more and more people are waking up to health and wellness and then psychedelics and whatnot, the subtle energy realm is next. It's like, well, if you're into microdosing, you have to understand, what's next. So hopefully it'll get there, and I hope you guys educate people and write about that. I also want to plug one last thing, which we could do a whole other podcast on. My friend Sam, who's teaching this program with me, my mom, as we had talked about, I think Roger had mentioned someone with Alzheimer's. So my mom has dementia, and we had to put her into assisted living recently. And, the last few years has been the decline. And there was a point where she really started getting like, hallucinations, and it wasn't going very well. And of course, the system wants to just like give her some pills and, make her like not feel anything and make her into a zombie. And I'm like, no, my brother and I thankfully agree on that part. Like, no, we're not going that route. And Sam kept saying reishi. Try some reishi, try some reishi. It was amazing how well it worked. I mean, and it's something there's only a little research, and I hope there's more coming out. But I had to talk to her doctors and nurses about, like, hey, this reishi is really working. I think you guys should look into it. And I actually finally had one doctor like get on the same page and be like, okay, telling my mom this is what you're going to take. But it was an interesting journey to convince, the Western system that we weren't going to try the pharmaceuticals that they wanted us to, probably spend $5,000 a month on, or whatever it is. And the simple reishi like really helped. And it's like, wow, where can this go? I'm a beekeeper and I grow my own food as well. And I followed the research done on the varroa mites, which are awful for the bees, and how this is, hopefully maybe one day we'll figure out that it's the mushrooms that are going to help the mites. But I'm curious, as the last question, and then we'll give you an opportunity to plug all of your things. Where do you think the future is going? I mean, I know about mycoremediation. I've had a former client work in that field. Where's the mushroom world, you think, going to go over the next, 5, 10, 15, 20 years? Like the short, long term, because who knows what'll happen beyond 20 years at this point. But any predictions for the mushroom world, or hopes or wishes?
You want me to go, Ken? I feel like this is
Yeah.
this could be a very long
I know.
question. I would say,
Yeah.
so for those listening that don't know the terminology, so the study of mushrooms is called mycology. And I would argue that mycology is one of the sciences that arguably still in its infancy. You know, as much as we know about fungi and bacteria, there are new mushroom species being found and DNA barcoded pretty much daily. So the fact that we're finding new mushrooms and the science is just starting to come around, in terms of, you know, better technology, better HPLC analytical testing. We're finding new compounds that exist in lion's mane, for instance. Last year they found, I believe, was like over 60 unidentified compounds. So we're scratching the surface when it comes to mushrooms. And you were talking about mycoremediation. We're heading towards, I try to look at life as not being linear, because life really isn't linear. But you look at the two different paths in this kind of 3D physical matrix that we exist in, and we have there's that one utopia where everything just like constantly gets better, and where we're focusing on green energy, and we're not, the war isn't raging between countries. And then the other path is the opposite. There's war, there's death, there's just like the hardships of humanity. And mushrooms are amazing at cleaning up any oil spills or contamination that we have. So my reason for kind of painting that picture is that, I think mushrooms really are the answer to all these things. When you look at, personalized antibiotics, or arguably like really futuristic DNA changed compounds, a lot of them stem from the fungal kingdom. So I think we're going to find new medicines over the next 100 years. Mushrooms are going to be the answer to cleaning up a lot of toxic, waste on this planet, which we're already seeing with, electronic car batteries, e-waste from the last 30, 40 years. And these things aren't getting better. The oxygen and all these levels are changing at a rapid rate. There's a lot of climate, disaster, if you will, it's hard to even call it that, just because I think it's normal for kind of how we're navigating life. But I think mushrooms are going to be the answer. We're talking about food, alternative, vegan leathers. And while it sounds, maybe a little futuristic and hipster in that respects, but it really is. There's already, if I was to paint a picture of where the world currently stands because of mushrooms, I mean, we owe pretty much everything to fungi on this planet. So I don't think anything's going to change in that respect. I think we're just going to find more and more and more.
Yeah. And I love that. And I'd like to just put it, since we did talk about mushroom essences, the saying, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. And I think the essences are going to be really helpful, as well as psilocybin and other mushrooms, like we've talked about. Reishi is really coming to know yourself, and to really love all parts of you, and to see, to be able to work with yourself so that we aren't the ones creating harm to our environment or to ourselves or to each other. And I do believe that mushrooms can play a big part in that. It may sound utopian and all that, but I believe that we've just begun what is possible with getting to be healthy ourselves and be the change we wish to see. And these all can be anything, but I really believe in it. And I've seen it for myself. I've seen the change in myself. I've seen the change in people I've worked with, people around me, people that have worked with these through us. And I just know what's possible. And the more we can share this, the more we can, it's love instead of fear, right? Fear separates us. Fear gets us really closed in on ourselves. And then, we do all kinds of things. But when we open to love and to our hearts and to each other, you talked about relational. That's what mushrooms are, right? They're the underground communication in the forest. They are the communicators. They are the connectors. And, I look at, I talk about IFS. I'm going to be meeting with Dick Schwartz in April about some of these things. And I'm really excited because I recognize, he worked with people who've had all kinds of done all kinds of things, or had kinds of things done to them. And he saw that each person inside has this self that no matter what you've been through or what you've done, is always there. That connection to this divine, this love, which is connection, which is relational. And so I believe, I mean, of course, then we're learning all these things like you've talked about with micro remediation. And I will say that my business partner with Chicago Mushroom Company was an environmental scientist. And that's kind of how we connected. She went through Peter McCoy's radical mycology and used mushrooms and plants, sunflowers and oyster mushrooms to clean up their farm in Chicago, and was doing testing for results. So we were, that was kind of our motto, was like cleaning, healing Chicago from the ground up, through mushrooms, both for the soil, for our environment, and for our bodies and our health and our relationships. And then, but it's also being used instead of styrofoam. I think Kia and Dell computers were two of the first that started using mycelium as opposed to styrofoam. And, there's all kinds of building materials now being made from mushrooms. So like all these biodegradable things that, instead of deforesting and, taking away our trees and doing all other kinds of harm, we can use mycelium and mushrooms to make all kinds of things. So there's so much. I mean, I will say, like Paul Stamets's book, what was it? Drawing a blank now, Roger. The one about how mushrooms can change the world or save the world. I will say that was
mycelium running.
Mycelium running.
Mycelium running. I'll give a plug to Paul because that book really got me excited about what mushrooms could be and do. And I think a lot of people who got into the mushroom world, like Paul was a big part of that, and like what mushrooms can be. And I think a lot of people then have taken it to the next level and shown us that a lot is possible. I mean, from food to medicine to healing. So yeah, it's all love. I think mushrooms are love. That's my opinion.
Of course. I love it. Well, you guys, we're going to have your links right here in the show notes, fruitingbodies.co, your Instagram, your website. Let me ask this. So this is probably going to be published in a couple weeks. Do you have anything, you mentioned being at Telluride and possibly psychedelic science, anything coming up that you want to plug or share about over the next, 6 to 12 months?
I would say we'd love to see everyone, whether it's Psych Science, if anyone's going there, or at Telluride. I highly recommend Telluride. It's amazing. And Robert Rogers, because we've spoken about him, who is also a really amazing human being, and like talk about like his energetics and everything. He's going to be with us at both of them. So you can also get to meet Robert there. And so we have, like I say, the essences. We have his book available. We want to get this out to as many practitioners as possible, as many people who want to try them and use them. And then same with all our functional mushroom products. We just, that's the other thing, is we are very available. Like we get questions all the time. Please reach out to us. Like we want to relational. We want to meet and talk. We build community, and community is really important to us. So if you want to learn anything more, if you want to know anything, if you want to get involved, like we have people who have found like all these benefits for themselves and now are taking it as affiliates to all the people in their lives so they can benefit. And so we're just creating this mycelium community, of like love that is bringing these products and this information and education to other people. But those are two of the big places that you can find us, besides online, and, reach out by email, and you'll hear back from Roger or I or both.
Yeah. Because you guys were super helpful to me. So I cannot recommend you enough. And I'm so glad we did this interview. It's really interesting. I've been wanting to interview more and more people about, the energetics and, mushrooms and this world, and, kind of exploring like what's happening and what the reality is. Cause it's definitely been a strange ride, watching like everybody and their mother jumping on these bandwagons, like you said. But at the same time, I always have faith that, whatever gets people to wake up and start to learn and take care of themselves, if it might mean that they spend money on a really bad product for a year and then they switch to a good product, like, hey. So thank you so much for all the work you do in the world and just being such like open-hearted, well-meaning guys. And, I really cannot recommend enough like purchasing these kind of products from good people, from good companies that actually like really care about good quality, and putting it out there with heart and with love. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I hope to see you at one or both of those. Who knows? And like this summer is already getting crammed, but I actually, if I could choose, because I've been to psychedelic science, I'm like, I kind of want to go to Telluride. It sounds more fun, anyways. We'll see it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you so much.